Tonight, the world's most dangerous maritime chokepoint may have entered a new and highly volatile phase. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage through which a massive share of the world's oil and gas supply moves every single day, is no longer just a pressure point on the map. It is now the center of a high-risk military standoff, one that could reshape naval strategy, global energy markets, and the balance of power across the Gulf. What began as a tense series of warnings, patrol interceptions, and regional threats may have turned into something far more serious. Reports from the region suggest that commercial shipping lanes are under severe disruption, naval units are moving into emergency positions, and the United States Navy has launched what appears to be a major response design to keep the strait open at any cost. This is not just about ships. This is not just about oil. And this is not just another routine show of force. If the Strait of Hormuz is truly being locked down, whether by mines, drone threats, missile risk, or coordinated maritime harassment, then the response from Washington was always going to be swift, layered, and overwhelming. And tonight, that response may already be underway. In the opening hours of the crisis, the first signs of escalation appeared not in headlines, but in movement. Surveillance aircraft were reportedly pushed forward. Reconnaissance coverage intensified. Carrier-based air wings shifted into a more aggressive posture. Destroyers operating in the region may have moved into screening formations, while maritime patrol assets began tracking surface contacts and possible fast-attack craft activity near the approaches to the strait. The reason is simple. The Strait of Hormuz is too important to lose. At its narrowest point, it is one of the most strategically critical waterways on Earth. Tankers, military escorts, container traffic, and energy shipments all pass through this corridor under the eyes of multiple regional powers. Any disruption here is not a local problem. It becomes a global shock almost immediately. That is why, if even the perception emerges that the strait has been locked, markets react, naval commanders reposition, and governments begin calculating worst-case scenarios in real time. According to the kind of operational pattern the U.S. Navy has used in past high-threat environments, the first phase of any massive response would likely focus on three things: detection, protection, and route control. Detection comes first because no fleet moves blind into a contested choke point. That means airborne early warning platforms, ship-based radar systems, sonar teams, signal intelligence assets, and unmanned surveillance systems would all play a role. The goal would be to identify exactly what is creating the lockdown. Are there sea mines in the channel? Are anti-ship missile launchers moving along the coast? Are drones being positioned for a swarm attack? Are fast boats staging for harassment operations against civilian shipping? Once those answers begin to form, protection becomes the next layer. Carrier strike group escorts do not just sail beside larger ships for appearance. Their job is to create a protective envelope, anti-air, anti-missile, anti-submarine, and anti-surface around the force. In a Hormuz scenario, that envelope becomes even more critical. A single destroyer can track multiple airborne threats. A cruiser can contribute to layered missile defense. Helicopters can scan for mines and surface movement. Patrol aircraft can push threat awareness hundreds of miles beyond the immediate battle space. And then comes route control. Because in a crisis like this, the mission is not merely to respond. It is to restore freedom of movement. That means the U.S. Navy's massive response would likely include the rapid establishment of protected transit lanes. Mine countermeasure teams could be deployed. Helicopters equipped for mine detection may begin sweeping sectors. Explosive ordnance disposal divers could be placed on standby for underwater identification and neutralization. Surface ships might reduce speed and move in carefully controlled formations while air cover circles overhead. Every move would be deliberate, every mile would be contested, and every decision would carry the possibility of escalation. One of the most dangerous features of any Strait of Hormuz standoff is that threats do not have to be large to be effective. A mine is cheap compared to a warship. A drone swarm is cheap compared to an air defense interceptor. A few missile launchers hidden along the coastline can force billion-dollar ships to alter course, slow down, and assume a full combat posture. That is exactly why a massive response is not just about firepower. It is about persistence, coordination, and layered defense. Imagine the sequence. First, an alert goes out across the fleet. Watch teams tighten procedures. Flight decks accelerate launch cycles. Armed helicopters lift off to extend the fleet's eyes over the water. Aegis-equipped warships bring their systems to peak readiness. Electronic warfare specialists begin monitoring emissions across the spectrum, looking for signatures tied to radars, drone control links, or missile targeting networks. Then the next step begins. Fighter aircraft launch. Not necessarily to strike first, but to dominate the airspace, identify movement, and make it unmistakably clear that any attempt to interfere with passage through the strait will be seen, tracked, and answered. Above them, surveillance aircraft orbit farther back, feeding a constant stream of information into the command network. Below them, ships continue forward, their crews operating at full readiness. Guns are manned. Interceptors are ready. Damage control teams are prepared. Medical units are briefed. Communication lines between vessels are tightened to seconds, not minutes. This is what a real maritime response looks like when a choke point is at risk. Not chaos, not panic, but an immense machine of detection, discipline, and force moving piece by piece into a narrow strip of water where one mistake can trigger something much larger. And that is the real danger here. Because once the United States Navy begins a massive response in the Strait of Hormuz, the operation is no longer just tactical. It becomes strategic. Every aircraft launched, every ship repositioned, every radar activated sends a message not only to forces in the Gulf, but to the entire world. The message is simple. The strait will not be surrendered. But holding that line is easier said than done. The geography favors disruption. The political environment favors miscalculation. The media environment magnifies every movement. And the military environment is crowded, tense, and packed with systems that operate at extreme speed. A radar contact can become a missile warning in moments. A surface intercept can become a confrontation. A warning shot can become an international crisis. That is why the most important part of the U.S. response may not be the first launch or the first escort mission. It may be endurance. Can the fleet sustain round-the-clock patrols? Can the air wing maintain continuous coverage? Can mine-clearing teams keep routes open long enough for commercial traffic to resume? Can naval commanders respond forcefully without crossing the threshold into a much wider war? Those are the questions that matter now. Because a choke point is not secured when a single convoy passes through it. It is secured when traffic begins moving again with enough confidence that shippers, insurers, energy markets, and allied governments believe the route can stay open. And that takes more than one show of force. It takes repetition. It takes visibility. It takes proof. Proof that mines can be found and cleared. Proof that missile threats can be tracked and intercepted. Proof that commercial ships can move under naval protection without being turned back by fear alone. If that proof begins to emerge, then the U.S. Navy's massive response will not just be measured by what it destroyed, but by what it restored. And what it restores, above all, is credibility. Credibility in deterrence. Credibility in maritime dominance. Credibility in the promise that the world's most important shipping lanes cannot be shut by intimidation, ambiguity, or sudden asymmetric pressure. Still, even if the route is reopened, the larger lesson will remain. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a trade artery. It is a test. A test of how modern naval power responds to drones, mines, missiles, coastal threats, and information warfare all at once. A test of whether a superpower can defend a narrow waterway without igniting a regional firestorm. And a test of whether global stability can survive when so much of the world's energy passes through one strip of water that can be threatened faster than it can be reassured. So tonight, as ships maneuver, aircraft launch, and radar screens remain lit across the Gulf, one fact is becoming harder to ignore. If the Strait of Hormuz is locked, even briefly, the consequences will be felt far beyond the Middle East. And if the U.S. Navy has indeed launched a massive response, then what happens next will not only decide the safety of a shipping lane. It may decide whether deterrence in the Gulf still works at all. Because once a choke point like this is tested, every Navy watches, every market reacts, every ally pays attention, and every adversary studies the response. The world now waits to see whether the passage remains contested, whether the escorts succeed, and whether the naval balance in the Gulf shifts from tension to open confrontation. For now, the mission is clear. Keep the sea lane open, protect the ships, control the airspace, find the threats, and hold the line in the one waterway the global economy cannot afford to lose.